In this unit, we're going to learn about irregular present tense verbs in Spanish. So if we're going to learn about irregular verbs, then I guess it would be good for us to go back and remind ourselves about what a regular verb is. Let's recall how the verb system works in Spanish. Whenever we look up a verb in the dictionary or in a glossary or on a vocabulary list, we're always going to look up the infinitive form of a verb. What's an infinitive? Well, in English, whenever we want to designate a word as an infinitive, we use the word to, T-O, to, and follow that by a verb. So to go, to run, to study, to pray, to eat, to think, to clean. These are all infinitives. So what's conjugating the verb? Well, conjugating the verb means I'm going to take that verb and I'm going to make it match whoever is performing the action of the verb. So let's talk about that. In Spanish, all infinitives end with AR, ER, or IR. That is without exception. Every verb in the Spanish language will fall into one of those three categories. They will all be either AR verbs, or ER verbs, or IR verbs. And incidentally, we're studying irregular verbs now. Well, there are thousands of verbs in the Spanish language, and most of them are regular. However, irregular verbs tend to be a lot of our high-frequency verbs, that is, verbs that we use a lot, just in everyday speech or in writing. And so we tend to learn them pretty quickly because we get used to them. But at any rate, keep in mind that these different patterns of verbs, they always resemble each other. It's quite easy to write poetry in Spanish because we can always find things that rhyme. But at any rate, we've learned that if I want to conjugate a regular verb, all I have to do is take the AR, the ER, or the IR off and apply a new set of endings. So we've been working with that. Well, now we're going to look at some irregular verbs where I have some more work to do. I have something else that I have to do in order to conjugate those verbs other than just change the endings. I've got three categories here. I've got stem-changing verbs, I've got go-go verbs, and I've got verbs that just have a weird yo form. So let's talk about that for just a minute. First of all, let's start with stem-changing verbs. Stem-changing verbs in Spanish come in basically three flavors. Now let's remember, every verb has a stem and an ending. I already know what I'm going to do with my ending. If it's an AR verb, I'm going to use AR verb endings. An ER verb, I'm going to use ER verb endings. An IR verb, I'm going to use IR verb endings. All right, so much for the ending. But what about the stem, the part that's left over? Well, sometimes there is an E in the stem. And when I conjugate that verb, I've got to change that E to an IE in everything except the nosotros form, or if we were studying it, the vosotros form. That is all of the singular forms, first, second, and third person, and the third person plural. The E will change to an IE. Don't worry, we're going to look at these. Right now, it just seems like I'm throwing vowels at you, but once you see these, it'll make sense. Sometimes there is an O in the stem, and that O will change to UE in everything except the nosotros, and once again, if we were studying it, the vosotros form. And then sometimes there is an E in the stem that changes to an I. Once again, first, second, and third person singular and third person plural, those forms will change. The stem will show that change. We're going to look at some of these and then it'll make sense to you. Then we've got a category called go-go verbs. Let's remember that in the yo form, whether it is an AR verb, an ER verb, or an IR verb, regardless, the ending will always be an O for regular verbs. All right, well, with go-go verbs, the ending is not O, but go. There's a G before the O in those verbs. And we've got a nice little list of those. Then we've got some verbs that just have a weird form in the yo form. That is, the yo form weirds out on us and does something different. And so everything on that verb might be entirely regular, but there will be something we've got to change in the yo form in order to conjugate the verb. So we've got a few of those as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. So another word for stem changing verbs is a boot verb. The reason we call these verbs boot verbs is because if I draw a line around all the forms that change, I come up with something that resembles a boot. So we got some pictures here of boots with verbs superimposed over them. And these are some of our stem changing verbs. First of all, I've got the verb pensar. Pensar means to think. Now, if this were a regular verb, then I would be saying penso, pensas, pensa, etc. But it's not. It's an irregular verb. It is an E to IE stem changing verb. So let's look at that verb, pensar. P-E-N-S-A-R. Well, the P-E-N-S is the stem. There's an E in it. In this case, we know that I've got to change that E to an IE for everything except the nosotros or, once again, the vosotros forms. So this is what we come up with. Pienso, piensas, piensa, pensamos, piensan. From now on, I will be skipping the vosotros form. All right, so that is an E to IE stem changing verb. Let's look at the next one, the verb poder. Poder means to be able to. This is how we use the word can in English. Like I can do that, I can sing, she can walk, they can talk. All right, so the word can is what we call a defective verb in English because I can't make it an infinitive by saying to can. That sounds like I'm preserving food, doesn't it? But I can say to be able to. Either way, in Spanish, the word to be able to, or in other words, can, is poder. P-O-D-E-R, poder. Poder. Now that's an ER verb, but it's also stem changing. There's an O in the stem, and it's going to change to a UE. So I can is not puedo, but puedo. You can, the to form is puedes, etc. Let's conjugate that together. Puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, pueden. So that's I can, you can, he can, we can, they can. All right, so that is an example of an O to UE stem changing verb. Once again, we call them boot verbs for obvious reasons here, because if I drew a line around all of the forms that change, it would look like a boot. Then let's look at the verb querer. Now, querer means to want. Querer means to want, and it is an example of an E to IE stem changing verb. Querer. So I say quiero for I want, quieres for you want, etc. Let's conjugate it together. Quiero, quieres, quiere, queremos, quieren. I want, you want, he wants, we want, they want. Okay, very good. Now let's keep something in mind. The letter I and the letter U are blending vowels in Spanish. That means that they will make one syllable out of themselves and whatever other vowel they appear with. If I don't want them to do that, I have to put an accent over the I, for example, in order to keep it from blending. Or I would have to change that I to a Y. Sometimes I have to do that because I can't put an accent on it. We're going to look at some of those spelling changes in a little bit, but I don't want to muddy the waters with them. And so these are not very hard to learn, But right now, I think we've got enough on our plate just learning how to make these stem changes. And so I will point these out to you. And where that becomes an issue, I will actually spell out the conjugations for you so you can see them. But at this point, just take it on faith. This is the way you spell the verb. It's not going to make any difference in the way you pronounce it. I just want you to be aware of that so you're not confused later on. But these are 3 examples of stem changing verbs. Let's look at a few more now. The verb mentir means to lie. It is an example. By the way, that means to lie as in to not tell the truth. This is an example of an E to IE stem changing verb. And I haven't made the boot quite so prominent here, but you can still see with a line drawn around them which forms change. So these are some more boot verbs. Mentir, miento, mientes, miente, mentimos, mienten. Your turn. Miento, mientes, miente, mentimos, mienten. Go ahead and repeat it. All right. How about the verb dormir? Dormir means to sleep. We got that word from the same place where English got the word dormitory. It came from Latin, and in English, the word dormitory means a room where you sleep. But at any rate, dormitory. But dormir means to sleep, and it is an O to UE stem changing verb. So in everything within the boot here, we're going to change the O to a UE. So I sleep is duermo, you sleep, the tu form is duermes, etc. Let's practice. Say them after me. Duermo, duermes, duerme, dormimos, duermen. Very good. And then we've got the verb pedir, and pedir is an E to I stem changing verb. E to I stem changing verb. Pedir means to request or to ask for. By the way, this is the word that we use for ordering food or ordering merchandise. Isn't it interesting that in English, we order the things we want. In Spanish, we request the things we want. Just a little note on culture there. But at any rate, pedir is an E to I stem changing verb. So notice the changes in the forms within the boot. Pido, pides, pide, pedimos, piden. Your turn now. Say them after me. Pido, pides, pide, pedimos, piden. So I've got some good news and some bad news for you when it comes to stem changing boot verbs. The good news is, as I was saying earlier, a lot of these are high frequency verbs. They're verbs that we use a lot in everyday speech, so it doesn't take long to get used to them. The other piece of good news is they always resemble each other. Once you learn how to conjugate a few of them, you basically just have to know, okay, this is an E to IE stem changing verb. That you already know how to handle it, or this is an O to UE verb, you already know how to handle it, or E to I, etc. Now the bad news. The bad news is there is no way to tell just by looking at an infinitive if it is stem changing or not. We learned the verb vender for to sell. Vender has an E in the stem, but it does not change. Vendo, vendes, vende, vendemos, venden. That is a regular verb. The verb comer, to eat, has an O in the stem, but it does not change. Comer is a regular verb. So we can't tell just by looking whether or not it is a regular verb. Usually when you look these verbs up, either in the dictionary or in a glossary or someplace, they will let you know right with the verb that it is stem changing and how it stem changes. Obviously, if there is an E in the stem, then we need to know for sure whether it's regular or not, or if there is an O in the stem, we need to know whether it is regular or not, and the dictionaries will always tell you. So do keep that in mind. One other thing to keep in mind as we move forward, sometimes we're going to have verbs that have two E's in the stem. In that case, always stem change the second one, never the first one. So this is going to come up as we move forward. Now, remember I told you these always kind of resemble each other? It helps sometimes if we can look at these in groups and just practice them all together. For the purposes of this video, I have not written out all of the conjugations because they always resemble one another. But in your book, you can actually see tables where you see these verbs actually written out. Plus, you'll find lots of sentence practice, paragraphs, reading practice. It doesn't take long before you just get used to these. Don't forget that if you're using your phone app, you can practice with the phone app as well. And once again, these come along pretty quickly as you start using them. After you've said it correctly a few times, it will feel funny to you to say it incorrectly. Let's look at a few more here. Let's break it down into categories. So we've got a few E to IE stem changing verbs. Let's look at another one here. We have the verb cerrar. Cerrar means to close or to shut. It is an E to IE stem changing verb. So the forms that change are highlighted in yellow here. Once again, all of the singular forms, first, second, and third person, and the third person plural are the forms that change. By now you've noticed that the nosotros forms never stem change. So something pretty reliable that you can do with nearly every verb in the language is if you can get to the nosotros form, just take the MOS off and put an R on it and you know what the infinitive is. All right, so let's practice with cerrar. I close, you close, he closes, we close, they close. Cierro, cierras, cierra, cerramos, cierran. I'll leave a little break after I say these so you can practice conjugating them. Once again, cierro, cierras, cierra, cerramos, cierran. Now, a few other E to IE stem changing verbs. Remember what I told you. If there are two E's in the stem change the second one. Here are just a few others that we need to learn. Empezar means to begin or to start. I'll conjugate the verb, then I'll leave a space for you to practice as well. Empiezo, empiezas, empieza, empezamos, empiezan. All right, the verb entender means to understand. Entender, to understand. Two E's, we're going to stem change the second one. Entiendo, entiendes, entiende, entendemos, entienden. All right, then we have the verb perder. Perder means to lose. Notice that in English we have the adjective, or I'm sorry, it's a noun. We have the noun perdition. Perdition means the state of being lost. Well, perder, which also came from Latin, means to lose. It is stem changing. E to IE stem changing. Let's do it. Pierdo, pierdes, pierde, perdemos, pierden. Then we have the verb preferir, which is a cognate. Cognates are look-alike words. It looks like an English word. It looks like the verb to prefer, and in fact, that's what it means. So once again, we're going to break this down into I prefer, you prefer, he prefers, we prefer, they prefer. Two E's, we stem change the second one. Let's go. Prefiero, prefieres, prefiere, preferimos, prefieren. All right, now let's look at a couple of go-go verbs. Remember I told you that if there is a go-go verb, then there will be a G before the yo in the, a G before the O in the yo form. And I've got two examples here. Notice that these are E to IE stem changing verbs. However, we're not going to make that stem change in the yo form on these. Instead, we're going to be sure to put the G before the O. So the verb venir is an IR verb. It means to come. Since it's an IR verb, my endings are going to be O, S, A, imos, N. However, notice what we do with the stem. Let's do it together. Vengo, vienes, viene, venimos, vienen. Your turn. All right, and then the verb tener. Tener means to have in Spanish. Tener. It is an ER verb, so my endings are OSA, amos, N, as you can see here. But look what we do with the stem. It's a go-go verb, and it's E to IE stem changing. So we come up with tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tienen. All right. Let's look at some E to I stem changing verbs now. E to I stem changing verbs. First of all, we've got another cognate here. This is the verb repetir. Repetir looks like the English word repeat, and that's what it means. Repetir means to repeat. We need to break this down to make it I repeat, you repeat, etc. So notice the forms that show a stem change are all in blue here, all of the singulars in the third person plural. But in this case, these E's change to I. And if there are two E's, like there is with repetir, once again, we're going to stem change the second one. So let's go ahead and work with this one. Repito, repites, repite, repetimos, repiten. All right, the verb servir is another cognate. It looks like to serve. Servir looks like serve, and that is what it means. But it is E to I stem changing. So, sirvo, sirves, sirve, servimos, sirven. Your turn. Now, in addition to the fact that the letter I wants to blend with whatever vowel it appears with to make it all one syllable, and so in order to avoid that, I have to put an accent mark over the I. When I don't want that blend to occur, or once again, sometimes I have to change the I to a Y. We've got another spelling change that we have to worry about. The letter G and the letter C, for that matter, both have two sounds in Spanish. You might remember from way back when we were learning to pronounce things in Spanish. The letter G has a hard sound, a G sound, before an A, an O, or a U, and it has a H sound like an H sound before an E or an I. The letter C does the same thing. The letter C has a K sound, like in the word cat, before an A, an O, or a U, but it has an S sound, S, before an E or an I. Well, what if I don't want them to? What if I want to have an E or an I in there, but I still want to have the hard G or the hard K sound? Well, for G's, I'm going to use the letter U as a silent letter, and I have gay and gi, G-U-E and G-U-I, to make that sound. For the letter C, I'll have Q-U-E or Q-U-I, K or key, That's why the word cheese in Spanish is queso, Queso. Now, once again, I'm just introducing you to this. I don't expect you to learn these spelling conventions on such short notice. But again, I don't want you to be confused when you see them either. So what I have done for the verb seguir, which shows that GUE change, as well as the verb sonreír, which has an accent over the I's, I've just written them out for you. I've got them written out here so you can see them. All of these other patterns you can see in the tables in your book if you need to see them conjugated, if you need to see them written out. But these in particular, I wanted to write them out for you on the slide so that you can see how these words are spelled. Seguir means to continue or to follow. We come up with sigo, sigues, sigue, seguimos, siguen. And then we have the verb sonreír. Sonreír means to smile. Sonreír. So I want to say I smile, you smile, etc. So this is an E to I stem changing verb. I do have to write an accent mark in, however, on the I before I add my O in order to keep it from blending. So let's go ahead. Sonrío. Sonríes. Sonríe. Sonreímos. Sonríen. All right, very good. Let's go on then to O to UE stem changing verbs. There will be an O in the stem. It will change to UE in everything other than the nosotros, or if we were learning it, the vosotros form. The verb volver means to return in the sense of to come back or to go back. That is, I'm actually going to return to some place, or I'm talking about somebody else returning, either coming back or going back to some place. To return. All right, the O changes to UE then for the stem changes. So what do we do with volver? You say it after me. We make it vuelvo, vuelves, vuelve, volvemos, vuelven. Your turn. Let's look at a few other examples now. We have the verb almorzar. Almorzar means to have lunch. All right, the O changes to UE in all of the forms that change. So we come up with almuerzo, almuerzas, almuerza, almorzamos, almuerzan. The verb encontrar means to find. Look how closely it resembles the English word encounter. Encontrar, to find. O to UE stem changing. Encuentro. Encuentras. Encuentra. Encontramos. Encuentran. Then we have the verb recordar. Recordar is a false cognate. It's a look-alike word. It looks like the English word record, but it doesn't mean the same thing. When we have look-alike words that do not mean the same thing between the two languages, we call them false friends or false cognates. So this is a good example of one. The verb recordar means to remember. It's also used for to remind. It is O to UE stem changing. Let's work on it. Recuerdo, recuerdas, recuerda, recordamos, recuerdan. All right, and then we have the verb devolver. This is just like the verb volver, but devolver means to return as in the sense of to give back. Not to go back or to come back, but to give back. So if I return my library books, or I return the money I borrowed, or I return some object to somebody. That is devolver, to return devolver. It's conjugated just like volver, so devuelvo, devuelves, devuelve, devolvemos, devuelven. All right, then we've got one verb, and I only know of this one verb. I don't believe there are any others in the Spanish language. A verb in which we have a U that changes to UE, and that is the verb jugar. Remember that J's are like an H sound in Spanish. Jugar. Jugar means to play in the sense of amusement. That is, in the sense of games or toys or playing with the kids. It does not mean to play in the sense of music. When we play music in Spanish, we use an entirely different verb. We use the verb tocar. Tocar usually means to touch. So just think of it this way. In English, we play the piano or the guitar. In Spanish, we touch the piano or the guitar. So something to keep in mind. Jugar. Juego, juegas, juega, jugamos, juegan. All right. Now we've already hit on a couple of go-go verbs. They were stem changing. We had venir, vengo, vienes, viene, venimos, vienen, and we had tener, to have. Tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tienen. Now we're going to look at some other go-go verbs here. These are not stem changing verbs. These would be entirely regular verbs were it not for the yo form. In the yo form, we have to put a G before the O, so it's a go-go verb, but other than that, it's regular. Let's look at the verb hacer. Remember that H's are always silent in Spanish. Hacer. Hacer means to do or to make. Hago, haces, hace, hacemos, hacen. Then I have the verb poner. Poner means to put or to place. The yo form is pongo. Now be careful how you pronounce that. This is not the 101 Dalmatians. That's not pango. That's pongo. O's are always o in Spanish. But pongo means I put or I place, etc. Let's do it. Pongo, pones, pone, ponemos, ponen. All right, oír, meaning to hear, is an example of a verb where I have an I that I either have to put an accent on in order to make sure that the stress falls on that syllable, or I have to change it to a Y because I want my stress to fall on the O. I don't want to say oi, I want to say o, and then the rest of the verb. Now that doesn't apply to the O form, but it does to the rest of them. So I've just got it written out here for you. Let's do it. Oigo, oyes, oye, oímos, oyen. Incidentally, we say oye in Spanish when we want to get somebody's attention. It's like saying listen up or hey, just to keep that in mind. And then we have the verb salir. Salir means to leave in the sense of to go out. Salir, to leave. It's a go-go verb. Other than that, it's regular. So we say salgo, sales, sale, salimos, salen. All right, and then we have some weird yo form verbs. These are only irregular in the yo form. Other than that, they are entirely regular. We've got a couple of them. here. The verb saber means to know. It also means to know how, like in the sense of having a skill, knowing how to do something. So the yo form is not sabo. The yo form is sé. So yo sé means I know in Spanish. No sé would be I don't know. Sé. Then the rest of it is sabes, sabe, sabemos, saben. Your turn now. Sé, sabes, sabe, sabemos, saben. And then we have the verb ver. Ver means to see. And this is so slightly irregular that you could even overlook the fact that it is an irregular verb. Technically it is, because if I take the ER off, that leaves me with the stem, which is only the letter V. And if I put my new set of endings on it, I would be putting on O, S, E, emos, N for an ER verb. So technically the yo form, if this were a regular verb, would be vo. But that's not the way we say it. We say veil. We leave the E in place. So therefore, that is technically an irregular verb. Let's say it together. Veo, ves, ve, vemos, ven. So this has been an introduction to irregular verbs, either stem changing verbs or go-go verbs, or verbs that have some funky, weird change in the yo form. But all of these are high frequency verbs. There are others that we'll have to get used to, but generally speaking, most of the time we're going to be able to tell you, look, this is conjugated just like one of these other verbs that you've already learned, and so that makes it very easy to pick up on the new ones. There's a lot of practice material that we'll be going through. We'll be working with these. It won't take hardly any time at all before you just simply know the correct form to use, and it won't be hard. I recommend, however, that you practice conjugating them, both writing them out as well as practice saying them in order to try to develop that muscle memory, so to speak. You want to get it to where you can do these automatically without having to think about them.